So hello, everybody. Welcome to the Texas Production Expo. I hope that I don't cause too much of a, of a reverb there. I'm Jacob Vu. I'm a creative director at AMS Pictures. I'm also a lover of espresso. I do CrossFit. I'm a car enthusiast. I'm terrible at tennis, and I'm working on pickleball. I'm unusually good at understanding dairy nutrition. So that's why I put nutrition-ish. And here's some pictures of some stuff that I've done. I got to see the Zuck, so that was fun. But most importantly, I'm an advocate for raising the standards of artistry everywhere and improving the interpersonal communications for everyone. Today I'm going to be focused on laying the foundation for improving yourself as an artist and as a communicator. And we're going to start first by just the state of the world. Again, can you hear me okay? I just want to make sure. Yes. We're all good. So first let's talk about artistry and imagination today, by how we observe it and how we know it. Ultimately, it's found that artistry and imagination is confined by the flow of trends, and that is not new necessarily. That has been going on for at least 100 years. But what is new is overstimulation, crowd mentality. The interconnectivity has kind of brought that upon us, especially with the advent of so much technology that has resulted in lightning fast content creation. I'm also going to say the next contributing factor, I should say, I'm going to try to say this phrase once because you're going to hear it a lot today, and you're going to hear it a lot probably this whole week. AI, right? Let's see if I can keep it at one. Ooh, that tripped me up for a second. Yeah, let's see if I can keep that at one. So this photo, for example, is generative content. It is ultimately just based and predicated on the idea of the sci-fi and cyberpunk genre. And what is so interesting about what generative content does is really show what we mean by the confinements of artistry today. Because really, generative content is the synthesis of generally known concepts to create the illusion of the abstract. Ultimately, if I type in cat in space wearing an astronaut suit, it is really seeing that as cat plus space plus astronaut suit. These are all things that are known, but brought together to create something abstract. It is extremely helpful, especially in the context of conceptualization and very easy storyboarding and mood boarding. Good stuff. But it also shows us a very clear example of how imagination works today, which is it is subconsciously confined to a box from the crazy amount of content that we have both created and consumed. I'm trying not to say AI. Generative content studies and is based on studies of data sets of things that we have created, things that we have conjured up, and the predecessor artists. And that's not a bad thing, but it also just, again, it just highlights that confinement that we have to what we can create. So the question then becomes, how do I separate myself in this massive pool of artists and robots that can and potentially will create everything that I could have created? How do we venture outside of the box? And that's where we introduce what curiosity really is. First of all, there is no such thing as an endpoint to artistic expression. History has taught us that experience and perspective make all the difference. When we look at the work of Shakespeare, he did not write the work of a post-war detective in the 1920s and 30s. He wrote what he knew. He wrote what he experienced and the perspectives that he built on that. And he had no way of being able to experience World War, for example. It'd be interesting if he did. I'd be curious what his works would look like. But that's ultimately, time is also a very big differentiating factor in that. So experience and perspective are massive contributions to what we know as our individuality. We are the only reflection of our current time and our current generation, and that's what makes us unique in one way. And you can make them components. So experience teaches us how to solve problems. Perspective defines our motivation behind solving those problems. So I have a frame here from Schindler's List. I hope that we all have seen that. It's a great example of Spielberg's experience and perspective growing up in a Jewish family and his ability to communicate such feelings to people who did not grow up in that environment. You're able to feel things without him even having to write a line of dialogue. The Red Coat, for example. Has anyone seen the Spielberg documentary? It came out a few years ago. Yes? Watch it. It's great, and it really shows you the amount of pain and also the amount of empathetic feelings that he went through when making this film. And I would argue that it made him such a strong and one of the only communicators to make a film like this. So art is really the communication of experience and perspective. We create to invoke feelings in our audience, and this is not just in film production. You could be a chef, you could be a fine art person, I guess. You could write music, you can do paintings, you can do woodworking, but ultimately you are creating something to invoke a feeling in someone, to share a unique experience, and to share a unique perspective. Barbie is a great example of that too. I think that if it weren't for Greta Gerwig, it would not have been communicated as well that Barbie, a movie about a toy, really is the communication of the experience in a woman finding her self-identity that can only be portrayed through lived experience and understanding, empathetic understanding. And more on the corporate and commercial end of it, this is some work that I've done for AMS in the past, back when I was an editor. It was the Lexus GX webinar. It was for a press release for Lexus. And it was ultimately to highlight the combination of introducing luxury to the off-road scene and how it can work together with Lexus Destinations, which is their program for resorts. What was so unique about this project was that it's not typical that an editor, myself, is flown out to Tennessee to shoot this thing or to be a part of the shoot and experience every aspect of it, from living and being a part of the resort to then transitioning into the off-road scene and being able to see firsthand what the GX could do and how it can articulate. It made me an incredibly effective editor as someone who did not know that much about off-roading besides seeing the suspension of an FJ Cruiser go out. So that's about all I knew originally. And I was able to very much and very easily piece together this thing because I was not given a script. And it was because I knew that the message was to communicate the experience of Lexus Destinations combined with the experience of the Lexus GX 550 and all of the fun features that it had to offer. And so I really got to live and breathe it. So art is then made better through experience and perspective. What makes you different and what can make you different in this industry is then to develop that range of experience. So I guess then the next question is, right, how do we do that? How do we start, and how do we make it easy for ourselves that doesn't completely disrupt our lives? I've actually said, and I've talked this talk to students before, 7th grade all the way up to senior year of high school, and I always tell them, listen to your teachers whenever they say, ask questions, because I didn't. Every time I was told to ask questions, I experienced the same feeling that probably many of you have, which is sitting in a room and being uncomfortably quiet because you either think that you have a good question, but maybe it's already been covered, or it's just going to be a really dumb question and your peers are going to laugh at you for it. The thing is, questions are free, they're easy, and they're not anything to be afraid of. I think that we need to get out the notion of anything being a dumb question. And that is where practicing curiosity becomes special, because yes, anybody can be curious, or a curious person, but can you be a curious person with intent to grow yourself? So asking questions is the simplest way to you becoming you, the iconic self of you, the one that people know you for. Your interests, your hobbies, your artwork, your expressions. And I just wanted to share this. This is a photo of the first 3D render that I ever did, because something about me is that I'm a big fanatic of visual effects. I made this mug 5th grade year with a really crappy laptop and a very early version of Blender. And it took me about 8 hours on a YouTube video that was 3 minutes, and I just kept rewinding it and playing it over and over again for a long period of time. And I didn't really quite understand it, and I was humbled. And something that I did learn was that the community around 3D, especially at that time, they loved to celebrate almost how much they tore their hair out when it came to learning these softwares. And and I say they loved, it seemed that they loved to share about how much pain that they were going through to get this render out and see something cool on their screen. I didn't feel that way because I didn't grow up surrounded by those types of professionals. And so for me, I was just very satisfied in seeing the finished product, despite its flaws. So I stuck with it, and I continued to ask myself questions. How can I do this? How can I do that? How can I take what looks to be a porcelain shader, make it glass? How can I do that? And then from there, I was like, glass. How about I add that to a windshield of a car? And what can I do with cars? So over iterations and iterations of questioning and finding those answers over time, we have my work today in 3D, and it is more of a hobby, but I thought I'd share it with you guys. So that was a demonstration of my vehicular know-how, but also this is requested by Visa, completely done in Blender, and I didn't use any of the other particle programs or Houdini and things like that to launch their Visa Analytics platform. I do a lot of studies into how to represent speed and force with cars. There's my glass version of the mug that came later in college. Full representation of the Earth. And this one I just wanted to share because Simu Liu threw me a challenge to put as many backgrounds as I could behind him as he was in this interview. He was just like, oh, it could be this, it could be that. And so I had to recolor a lot there. And then this was a project for my final exam of college before I left it. Curiosity has no limits, and that is really exciting. And the thing is just as I'm saying, everything has a purpose. The useless knowledge, and you will gather that as you continue to ask questions, you will find yourself being like, well, that person just told me a bunch of stuff that I don't need to know. That doesn't exist. Anything can be used. I had a mentor, James Wilkinson. He once told me, because I asked him, what do you think when you think of a creative person? And he said, when I think of a creative person, I think of somebody who is interested in everything and anything. And that is how you have to approach this. You have to approach your life this way, not just the industry. And I wanted to share this too. This is one of my early experiments with the Mercedes Drift, 180 Drift. I did a lot of study into Pennzoil and the way that they marketed their cars, basically. So that's inspired by that. An artist is made better by their range of experiences. I mean, I can represent the true feeling of speed and force because I have ridden in fast cars. I've ridden in a lot of fast cars. And I did that with intent because I wanted to understand the feeling that I need to convey to an audience someday. If, let's just say, for example, I put a Supra on an LED stage. Let's just say. So besides that, how can you interview a football player if you've never watched the games? And how can you recreate water if you do not know the physics of water, right? You can, but it just won't be your best work. And so this is about making you a better artist. So again, I take a very scholarly approach when it comes to understanding this stuff. You don't have to be this way, but just to give you an idea of my process, I want to start with some trivia. Does anybody here, first off, does anybody here work in 3D or have messed with 3D programs ever? Does your company do? Cool, cool, okay. Can you tell me what the index of refraction is for water? Any guesses? Ballpark, anything? Got it, okay. I'll give it a second here for you guys to think about it. What you're seeing here is a thing I whipped up in about 3 hours. The render time was a little longer than that. But it is actually a Spotify canvas for my cousin. And the thing that is so interesting about my cousin is that she is a registered dermatologist, but she is now, as of the past 2 years, also a singer and songwriter on the side. And that was her journey into curiosity and understanding that there are no limits. And that, yes, I have been through a ton of medical school and residency and all of the practice that goes into getting into a good field of dermatology, and she is established in that field. But she found herself not fulfilled. She found herself feeling like there is more to life than this. And so she started asking herself, well, I used to sing songs when I was a kid, and I love songwriting now, I love playing the guitar now. So eventually all of her questions led to the final question that everyone is going to reach at some point, or they already have reached it, and that's what brought you to your jobs here in the Texas Production Expo, is why not? And so now she does concerts here in Dallas and stuff. So if you want to talk more about her, I'd love to right after this. So the index of refraction is 1.33. And then this is also a breakdown of my process in putting this whole Spotify canvas together. And really, the takeaway here is not that I'm trying to teach you guys Blender. The takeaway here is that I've never attended a professional visual effects school. Yes, I've worked with people from Pixar. Yes, I've worked with people from Weta. But I never asked them for specific or particular training in anything. I just explored on my own and enjoyed the process of it. For example, for this project particularly, the only tutorial I actually looked up was how to make a Blender ocean, because there's an ocean modifier in Blender, No one needs to know that. Everything else came from my understanding of what water is and how water works. So in the making of Finding Nemo, for example, Pixar had to commit a lot of time into understanding the color science behind what happens when you're underwater and how light bounces. But what they didn't do, today the easy thing to think with all of our computing power is to say, let's recreate the ocean in mathematical accuracy. But that's not what they did. They just boiled it down to a color science, and they followed that color science, and they followed that lighting science. They didn't have to create an entire machine learning simulation for it. And so that's what I did. All I did was I asked questions. I said, why is water murky? And then I realized that what I was really describing was volumetrics. And so then I put a volume scatter underneath the ocean, and that gave me the intended effect that I needed. And that's all you need to do to make something that looks pretty good, I'd say. I'm not going to pat myself on the back too much. So curiosity will separate yourself from the bunch in your industry. I think I've made that point clear. More knowledge. Actually, I should say, I put in your industry. I did not put in the film industry, because it does not just apply to that, it applies to any industry. You may be thinking about, right now, moving on from the film industry, or you may be just getting into it. So just know that when you practice curiosity, it does not just help you in one field of artistry. It helps you in everything you do, including the most corporate job that you could possibly do, like accounting. But having a curious mindset and having that repertoire of understanding things is going to help you so much, even in the conversation of interviews. It'll help you get awarded a job, it'll help you get promoted, and it may even promote a freer and more enjoyable lifestyle. One of the #1 reasons that we find that today our day-to-day lives move too fast is because we are stuck into a routine. We know what places we want to go for lunch. I suggest let's try finding a new place to try out. Let's, give yourself something to do that is different per day. And you'll find that your days are a little longer, but not longer in the boring way, longer in the fulfilled way. And you get to come home and you get to be happy that you got to do something different. And so one of the things that I've been promoting at AMS, for example, is that people who are interested, try to take a picture of something interesting as you go through your day. And just work on your composition of photography. You don't have to study it, you don't have to watch a lecture or anything, but just go out and just start practicing taking some photos of something cool that you saw. And if you didn't see anything cool that day, then it's time to make some adjustments. So, I also included this photo because I find it to be another important point about getting awarded a job. So when I first started out, which was not that long ago, because as you can see by my baby face, I'm not that old. I wrote a paper in my freshman year of college outlining what I believe to be the first stages of virtual production. And you're going to hear that word a lot too, so I'm going to try to use that sparingly. The first stages of virtual production and what that pipeline would look like based on Unreal Engine 4 and what end display was. And I did this because I was trying to communicate to my professors that we need to start teaching this in our classes. We need to start teaching the pipeline because it's going to become part of our everyday. And it's here to stay. It started with our understanding of what rear projection was. And if anyone's seen Avatar, that was one of the first examples. Oblivion, that movie, was a huge example of what original virtual production looked like. But at the time, it was not very known. Just a year later, I ended up leaving college because I got awarded a job for my understanding of Unreal Engine, even though that is not what I was going to do at the job. I went to an agency called Intrepid in San Francisco, and I studied more on the topic. More than that, again, I said this steps outside of just your career in film production or in artistry in general. We live in an age not of information, but an age of misinformation. And therefore, critical thinking is needed more than ever, and especially in the younger generation. Now, it's not a matter of you should ask questions anymore. It's a matter of you must ask questions if you want to do more than accept the world at face value. So asking questions is the first step to not just innovation, but also to your understanding of the world. Because you're going to be building your experience. You're going to be building your perspective on it. So you'll become more informed. You will have new perspectives on things. If you've ever immersed yourself in a different culture in the world, then you know this very well, is that you have a different perspective on things, and you have different judgments from that. And you become a better conversationalist in the process. I mean, if you guys are world travelers, or if you have friends who are world travelers, then you know that they can hold an anecdote like none other. Like they can just keep talking. Oh, actually, I'm going to hold on that slide for just a second. So this was another thing that I did when I was a little frustrated kid in college who wanted to teach a little bit more about media literacy and whatnot. I had my peers take a look at a video that I shot and ask them what in the video is fake. So I'm going to have you guys do that as well. So just take a moment and take a look at it, and then just blurt out if you think that something in it is fake. Anyone? All of it? Okay, okay.
Scrap.
What's that?
Scrap.
Scrap?
Scrap.
Okay.
For the camera.
Yeah. So yeah, you were right. All of it. You can tell he's got experience. He's like, yes, of course. He knows that this kid just sourced from Polyhaven. Like, he knows. But yeah, I whipped this up together in about an hour, rendered it in an hour, so 2 hours total, because I was a procrastinator, and shipped this to my professor. And my professor and all of the students in that class were stumped. They thought that maybe the Chris Vector or just the camera or anything on the table was fake. And that was intentional because one of the oldest tricks in the book in visual effects is the same as being a magician, which is misdirection. I placed a Chris Vector there specifically to throw people off, and so the most that they could form from there is that maybe the camera next to it is also fake. So again, I'm glad that you said that, because that gives me a good amount of hope in humanity. But you can also very well gamify it and make things very simple for yourself. This does not have to be your hill to die on mission. This is just something that you do every day. I get bored very easily. I have trouble getting out of bed in the morning. I'm not a morning person. And the fact that I'm standing up here on stage is actually an improvement. This is my actual task list on the many different random lists I have on my phone. Test drive a new car. There's a new Tai Chi class that opened at my apartment. I just got a new video game. It's called Ghost of Tsushima. If you haven't played it, it's awesome. And I'm still playing it, trying to learn everything about it. And Cosmics just opened near AMS, and I've got to try that too. So I'm all about trying to find a new experience per day in some capacity, whether it's even just changing the way that I go to work or something. And it really helps me because I get to go home and tell myself that despite a pretty standard workday, I did something new. And that makes me feel more fulfilled inside. But also, someday down the line, one of these 4 things may come in handy. Maybe my next client also wants to check out Cosmics. And now I know what to recommend them. I have not been there yet, so I cannot recommend you guys anything yet. But that is on a more like slice of life type of way of looking at it. So what does it look like when it's professionally applied? So James Wilkinson, one of my creative director mentors that I knew, he used to work at the Marketing Store in London. I don't know how many of you know the Marketing Store as an agency? Okay, you do? Cool. So then you know a little bit about their reputation and the over 30 years of work that they have done in partnership with McDonald's for their supply line. But what James once told me was that he and the creative team actually went out and had to work as McDonald's employees for at least a few days. Some of them stayed for a month. And what they were doing was they were building that lived experience because their pitch for the next set of campaigns lasted an entire year. And so in that process, they attribute it most to the lived experience that they had working as a McDonald's employee and really understanding the line of work from top to bottom. And they were able to use that and leverage that into their pitch. So that's what it looks like when it professionally applied. And finally, I want to talk about what really inspired the entire process of me wanting to go on this mission to improve artistry, to improve interpersonal communications, was this quote by Johnny Ive. He was, without a doubt, the most curious human I have ever met. Who is he talking about?
Steve Jobs.
Exactly. Which is true. Steve was an extremely curious person, and sure, a lot can be said about his personality and a lot can be said about his takes on certain things, but the point is that by creating a persona of being that curious, he set a legacy for Apple that still exists today, which is to think differently. And it's still very true because, as you've probably seen in 1,000 tech channels by now, Apple doesn't necessarily innovate as much as they reimagine things. And they see it from a new perspective. They show it from a new perspective, a more luxury-oriented perspective, I would say. So you've seen now how innovators use curiosity, how other creators have used curiosity, and what I'm really saying is how they use intentional curiosity, and that is ultimately what I wanted to share today. So I'm actually very happy that I get to be one of the first presenters up for the Texas Production Expo, because now you have a playground to practice intentional curiosity and practice more laser-focused understanding and cognition of looking at the booths around you today. So I'm pleased to kick off the Texas Production Expo that way. And if you would like to start practicing now, if you have any questions for me, that's the rest of this presentation. So yeah.